So we talked a little bit now about the upsides of oxygen therapy. Can you describe for us a little bit some of the challenges that you've experienced throughout your oxygen career, so to speak?
Well, I think in the beginning, like many people, I didn't want to use it. I didn't want to be seen in public with it. I was kind of, like lots of people, I really did not want to be seen using it. It was not something that was useful enough to me to put up with the potential embarrassment, whatever, that kind of thing. And it took a while to get rid of that, quite honestly. That kind of reaction, I think, is extremely common. I think many people feel that way. What I have learned, though, over the years is that 90% of the time, nobody pays any attention to whether I'm wearing oxygen or not. They really don't, because they are far more concerned about their business and that kind of thing. And the other thing I've learned is that if people if people do approach you, or some kid in a grocery store points his finger and says, "Mom, that's funny," or something like it, that's a good opportunity to try to educate people. And sometimes kids are even the best, because when you're educating a child, I mean, you're doing it in a slightly different way. I usually tell them that, the air here isn't good enough for me. I need better air. So I'm doing better than you are because I have better air than you do. you know and you can kind of explain a lot of things that way. But mom is also listening to this, and mom also gets the idea. And the fact that you've not reacted badly to her child being mildly rude is always a good thing. You always gain friends by doing something like that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Are there any strategies or resources that helped you get from that point of feeling that, perhaps for lack of a better term, that stigma or that reluctance to wear oxygen to that point where you could kind of own it and share it with other people?
Yeah, and the way I did it really was kind of unusual, I think, because I was diagnosed in 2000 and I did absolutely nothing for a couple of years. As a matter of fact, I gained weight and got worse, is what it really amounted to. And finally, then in 2003, I landed in the hospital with respiratory failure, and I asked my doc, "Okay, what do I do about this?" And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Well, if you'd lose some weight," and I was almost 300 pounds at that point. So, and I'm not very tall. So, I was kind of as round as I was tall. But he said, if you lose some weight, your problems aren't going to go away, but they're going to get a lot easier to deal with. So I thought, and the way he said it, I was convinced that he didn't think I could or would. Uh, and I don't know why he would have thought anything else anyway, because all he'd done for 10 years is watch me gain weight. So, I'm no, he didn't have any reason to think I would lose it. But it made me mad. And so I was angry at him, and being in the hospital and getting air out of a wall, and lying in bed and still being a bit short of breath was pretty scary. And I think for the first time at that point, I realized that this was something that really could kill me. Anger and those kinds of things can be very, very motivating. And so I really got on a kick. And I said, all right, by golly, I'm going to lose this weight. And I started with a diet. And 2 weeks later, I went back to him and said, I can't do this on just a diet. I got to exercise. Is there any reason why I can't? And he kind of looked at me and he said, no, you don't have any heart issues. You don't have any physical structure issues. You don't have any of the things that would very often get in your way of exercising. He said, the only thing I want you to do is I want you to make sure that when you start to exercise, you make sure your oxygen is way up there and you keep it at about 95. It's going to make it a lot easier for you. And it's going to help you stay on your exercise program a lot longer, for each session. And he kind of looked at me, he says, knock yourself out. Oh, and then he also said, remember that oximeter thing that you bought that I told you not to buy? I want you to use it now. and, and you're going to use it while you're exercising to make sure that your oxygen level stays up. And if it gets too low, you stop or you slow down or you do something, but you don't let it get too low. So that's the only limitation you're on. So I really did go on a very, very aggressive diet and exercise program for the next 18 months. I really worked on that and I lost well over 100 pounds. My doctor was probably one of my biggest cheerleaders. He was absolutely wonderful in all of this. And part of what I learned was that oxygen really helped me go harder, faster, longer, more intense. I could make progress fairly quickly in terms of what I could do on a bike or a treadmill and those kinds of things. And I kind of learned all of that. But then I also learned that, by golly, my oxygen saturations were going way, way up, and I didn't have to turn the oxygen up nearly as much. And then it got to the point where I didn't have to have the oxygen at all to exercise. And I was exercising at a really high intensity for somebody with COPD, I think. On the treadmill, just to give you an example, I was doing 3 miles an hour and alternating between 7 and 9 degrees of incline because I was all about calories in, calories out. And I hadn't really thought about what it would do to my breathing or do with my breathing or for my breathing, but boy, it helped. It made a huge difference. And actually what ended up happening was that I went off oxygen with the exception of for sleep and for flying for close to 10 years.
Wow.
So yeah, it wasn't until 2013. And then when I went back on oxygen, I asked for it. And I asked for it because I knew that I was not able to keep my saturation levels up where they needed to be when I was exercising. So I needed to add exercise to that. And that's where I first started using, that's where I first started using oxygen again. But at that point, I had learned so much, not only from my own experience, but also really paying attention to the experience of other people who were on oxygen, seeing the kinds of things that they did, the tricks and all the things that people do, and learning all that stuff. So that when I went on it the second time, it was because I knew I needed it. And I knew what it was going to do for me.